Okay, everyone, welcome to our first FoRēL webinar. Good evening to those based in Europe. Good afternoon to those in North America. Welcome from wherever you are joining us. My name is Lea Schlenker. I am a Lutheran theologian from Germany and a founding member of FoRēL. We are happy and grateful to see 30 participants in this virtual gathering. Today's topic will be young women of faith in our secular and pluralistic world. We, as organizers, are especially excited about today's meeting, as it is our launching event of FoRēL, Female Religious Leaders. About 4 months ago, we met in the final panel of a summer school on challenges for human rights in the time of COVID-19, which was organized by the Conference of European Churches, CEC, and the Protestant Church in Germany, EKD. As we were talking about our experiences as young religious people, we realized that even if we have different backgrounds, we share some interests and concerns. We are young women. We identify ourselves as religious in a certain faith tradition, and we believe that our communities need more female leaders. This is why we decided to start a new platform to learn from women and their experiences as leaders. We want to engage in real conversations. We want to connect on the panel, but also with you as participants. You will have noticed that both your camera and your microphone are turned off. However, you can engage with us via the chat and send questions either to all of us or to specific panelists. After a short round of introductions, Karen Wirtz will present us some theoretical frameworks on secularism and pluralism. With this background, all panelists will engage in a conversation. And last but not least, we will open the floor for your questions. So please go ahead and send us your questions while we speak. Now, I won't let you wait any longer. Panelists, please present yourselves.
Thank you, Leah. Good evening, good afternoon. My name is Natia. Originally, I am from Georgia, and now I live in Italy, Orthodox Christian.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hibela Tresh. I am based in Strasbourg, France, and I am here as I'm currently the General Secretary of FEMISO, the Forum of European Muslim Youth and Student Organization, and I'm looking forward to that panel alongside all of you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Spiridula. I'm an Orthodox Christian in the United States of America, and I'm excited that you're all joining us today.
My name is Karen Wirtz. I am a Protestant Christian, a Baptist more specifically, based in Germany, and I work for the European Baptist Federation as a researcher and advocate in human rights and freedom of religion or belief.
Hi, everybody. I'm Hajar, based in Dublin, currently the head of the youth board for Dublin City Interfaith Forum, and it's really great to have you all here.
Great. And as Leah said, I will kind of open us up with a short discussion on an introduction to the topic. The question that's going to kind of lead our discussion with each other tonight is, how do we function as women of faith in our secular and pluralistic world? So I currently, alongside my responsibilities with the European Baptists, I am also studying in a master's program entitled Interreligious Studies and Philosophy of Religion. So when I see this question, how do we function as women of faith in our secular and pluralistic worlds? The little philosopher in me just wants to break down the terms and define them. So I'm going to do that boring part so then everyone else can talk about the fun stuff. But these are kind of big concepts, our secular world and our pluralistic world. And I think the Charles Taylor, a Canadian philosopher with a Catholic background, does a really good job of breaking down secularity or secularism into kind of three aspects, which are pretty easy to it makes it easier to understand. There is a political aspect to secularity, there's a sociological aspect, and there's an experiential aspect. So the political is simply this, what some people in some contexts might call separation between church and state. It doesn't need to be church, it can also be other religious traditions, but it's basically the idea that the sphere of the political and the sphere of the religious are separate spheres, which is really influential in the political world that we live in. There are very few nation states today that function as theocracies, and most nation states in some way, shape, or form try to separate these spheres. So that's political secularity. Sociological secularity is kind of the observation of a reduction of traditional expressions of religiosity over the past, according to Charles Taylor, 500 years, which is a big scale. One kind of a more graspable aspect of sociological secularity would be in Western Europe or North America. There have been kind of decreases in Christian church attendance and expressions of Christian religiosity for about the past 50 years, and that has been a bit of a steady decline. And then the last aspect of secularity is kind of experiential. This is a bit abstract, but a person of faith today or a person of no faith today generally experiences their religiosity as a choice among many. If you are a devout Muslim or a devout Christian or an atheist, you realize that you could be otherwise, and it would be legal, it would be possible, and there are kind of different ideas about what religion is or should be that all coexist in one social space. So that's kind of these aspects of secularity, which maybe to some of us don't seem super new, and some of us they seem really new. But it's kind of a bit of, I think Charles Taylor tells a good story about what secularity is. His focus is, of course, he always has an eye to Christendom or the West, but I think as the dynamics of globalization and pluralism, our pluralistic world, kind of make this more and more relevant. More people experience secularity in some way, although differently in different cultural contexts. So yeah, in some ways, globalization has intensified the effects of secularization. Globalization and demographic changes mean that more and more people come into regular contact with persons of different faiths. This is especially true of those of us from younger generations, so the under 40 crowd. We have neighbors, co-workers, friends, and even family members of different faiths. This is in many ways a great gift, but it can sometimes be a socially, spiritually, or emotionally challenging reality. With such a plurality of religions and cultural perspectives, it can be difficult to really understand one another, where we're coming from. I'll give 3 short examples of what possible misunderstandings can be in our secular and pluralistic world. One that I come across often is people who identify as a nun, so someone without a very strong religious background, struggle to understand their friends or co-workers of religious faith, whether they be Christians, Muslims, Jews, Baha'i, Buddhists. Many people see religion as old-fashioned, superstitious, or repressive. And some people with a more secular background can't conceive really of the difference between religiosity and religious fundamentalism. The other side of the coin is that some people who grew up in a more traditionally Christian or Muslim society or with a background might have been taught at some point that an atheist or an agnostic person cannot have a sense of morality. This is well expressed by this quote by Dostoevsky, "Without God, all things are permissible." In reality, of course, people without religious faith demonstrate high levels of ethical responsibility. That's without question. One more misunderstanding is kind of intergenerational misunderstandings. Parents and grandparents often grow up with a different set of formative beliefs and understandings of what proper religion is than the younger generations. This is what kind of Charles Taylor calls pre-ontology, the assumptions about the world that come before we actually formulate a belief. As the world gets more pluralistic, our assumptions about the world change. This is a bit abstract, and some different generations have very different ideas about what right religiosity is or the role of religiosity in the public sphere. So these are some misunderstandings. What's very critical and what we've become very aware of recently, again, is that these misunderstandings can sometimes escalate and turn into religious discrimination, hate, or violence. You see this in I'm using Europe as an example recently. You see cases of majority violence to minorities, religious minorities, and this is characterized or exemplified by the attacks in Halle in Germany last year, these anti-Semitic and Islamophobic attacks. You can also see violence of religious minorities against the perceived majority, as we see in these awful attacks in France and in Vienna last month by Islamist extremists. These are, of course, I have short time here, so I'm not trying to provide all-encompassing examples of the way that religious violence can happen, but just give us a few examples to kind of orient us to the seriousness of these issues. I personally was taught growing up as a child that polite people don't talk about politics or religion. This was quite hard advice for me to follow, if I'm honest. In such uncertain times and with such intense ideological polarization, it might seem like an attractive retreat to simply not talk about politics or religion. I am, however, convinced that this advice isn't actually that helpful. I believe the right action in such a world as this is to have the courage to honestly and respectfully engage with our friends, neighbors, and acquaintances, to be willing to share of the deep gifts of our own spiritual traditions, and also be willing to be receptive to the gifts that the other has to offer. Extremism has many different causes, but one contributing element to the growth of hate and fear is one side is the failure to understand others, and the other is the failure to feel understood by others. In such a tumultuous climate, it's the role of the peacemaker to make the first step towards the other, to extend that proverbial olive branch and to proactively make peace. The strongest ethical call of my faith tradition, which we Christians actually borrowed from the Jewish tradition, from the Torah itself, is to love your neighbor as you love yourself. If you turn that over in your head a little bit, you'll realize it's a radical call, one that leaves no room for violence. And it was this ethical call which, in part, inspired me to begin this journey with this group of women in FoRēL, this incredible group of female leaders and peacemakers. So today, I'll pose a few questions to help us get to know these impressive young women of faith, and later we'll open up the discussion for you to also ask some questions. Write your questions in the chat as they come up, and we'll get to the Q&A session later. So thank you so much for letting me do that introduction. And we'll start with question number one to our panelists. Who are you, and how do you understand yourself as a young woman of faith?
So maybe I start. I told you in the beginning that I am a Protestant Christian. And actually, since a teenager age, I wanted to be a pastor. So I went on to study theology, which kind of transformed and really intensified my faith and also my religious practice. However, from the very beginning, I felt this need to translate my religion into different contexts. I felt that I was misunderstood. And so that's why I'm so glad to have this conversation tonight.
For me, so who am I? I actually, at the beginning, struggled a bit to answer that question, although it does seem, quite simple, just because I was thinking, are we expected to use labels? And I think that also showcases how we're thinking lately. It's all about putting people in boxes and not going further. So I was going to start that I'm a human being, but I'm also a young woman, a young Muslim woman living in France, and studying, pursuing a master's in comparative law, and decide I'm trying to, make some change by being the General Secretary of the Forum of European Muslim Youth and Student Organization. So it's different things, but when it comes to my faith, for me, all those things are linked to it, because to me, being a woman of faith and believing is having faith building my identity, and it transpires and brings purpose to everything from mundane daily activities to shaping my understanding of my existence on earth. So for me, it's through faith, for instance, that I'm an activist or doing these things today, but also that I'm trying to be in this pursuit of justice and truth.
I'll also add in, I really echo both what Leah and Heba already said, but definitely for me, being an Eastern Orthodox Christian in the US, and then that being tied into everything that I do, very much my faith is something that I strive to make a way of life, as we say in the Orthodox faith here, but also it really challenges me to see the beauty and the awe of what is around us, and especially in moments that we were saying of violence or different things that are really overwhelming, as we're overwhelmed in this world in a lot of ways right now. It really reminds me, like Heba said, that we are ultimately human beings, and I think at least that we all have an intrinsic goodness, and that so my faith really leads that. And also as a young woman, especially working for the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America, which is the headquarters, so to speak, of all Greek Orthodox parishes in the United States, it really challenges me as a young woman, with the youngest woman here actually, to really open the spaces for other young females and to really be encouraged that the church is opening these spaces for us to be here and to really have our voices heard.
Thanks, FoRēL. I probably want to echo exactly what everybody else is saying, but just to be kind of a little bit different. Obviously, I'm a Muslim. Faith for me is, the cross between the spiritual and the physical realms, but it's also the notion of being, as the rest of my friends and sisters who are on this call have said, it's about being in a prime position to be of service to others, and that for me is probably one of the the roots of who I am as a person. And I guess the spiritual versus there's no spiritual versus the physical, rather they exist together. So for me, it's more about representation as a Muslim woman. I am outwardly Muslim, outwardly, you can see this in the way I speak and the way I am and who I am as a person. But so it's about representation, activism, and service for me. I think that's who I am, and that's what being a Muslim woman of faith, and hopefully it's a leadership position for each of us. But that would be my story.
Yeah. Again, I echo all the words, and I share all the feelings that my friends and colleagues shared here. And let me also greet those who just joined us, and just to say that I'm the Orthodox Christian, so I have quite diverse cultural background. I was born and raised in Georgia, but over the last 10 years I live now in Italy. And faith to me is really like living by and applying the core values and principles to my daily life. This personal lived experience allows me also to complement my professional endeavors and efforts for human rights, interfaith cooperation, and social justice. I work for the World Student Christian Federation as a regional secretary and interfaith program director. So it all starts and ends from my personal passion to my work and professional life.
Thank you for those responses. My microphone's on, right? Yes. What I really hear from all of you is this faith motivates your action in the world. It motivates you to want to give good to the world. And I think that's something I heard in what everyone said, which is encouraging. Yeah. For the next question, I want to ask you all then, what are your experiences of secularity or of pluralism? What are the challenges and what are the opportunities that you find in your situation or context?
Well, to be honest, and I think in a way our first round reflected this. I can't even think of a world or of a surrounding for myself that is not secular or pluralistic, right? This is where I was born. This is the mindset into which I was raised. And so in a way, I always feel a certain tension between my religious life and the secular context, but also between the secular self, which I find in myself, and my religious practice. So, for example, I live in Germany, where we do have a separation between state and church, but the religious communities, and especially also my church, we have a lot of privileges. So we have a special role in society. Nonetheless, I, as a religious person, I feel really a bit of a weirdo, you know? So I would never pray in public. I feel strange to talk to people religiously with all these religious words. And this is a bit sad, actually, because whenever I meet people, really random people on the street, and we have to talk about what are you doing, and then I say, well, I'm a theologian, you know, and I'm going to be a pastor. And then people come with these huge questions about God, the purpose of life, and their family, and everything, like the big, big things. And then I'm so touched in a way. And also, there are so many questions, and there's so much need to talk about religion. But somehow we don't meet this need, and we don't, I don't know. So sometimes I feel I should be more open, maybe not as afraid to act as a religious being. And on the other hand, I really have to say that I'm kind of really grateful for my secular context, because of course it limits me in a certain way of expressing my religion. On the other hand, it enables me to do such great interfaith talks, and to meet such awesome people as I met with you, because I don't have a state that imposes a certain religious tradition on myself and all the others. But instead, I can just go to my workplace and talk to a Muslim, go to my church and meet there with a Catholic Christian of a different tradition, go to my family and have a lot of atheists, and it's not a problem, right? So that's enriching, I think.
I definitely like this idea of the tension. I feel this, it's like this balancing of this tension, but also the beauty in it, Leah, that you were saying. So for me, also being in the United States of America, mostly in New Jersey, New York area, and really growing up in the subculture of Greek American life, which in itself is a completely different thing as well. But being in this kind of place of the United States is built on this deeply religious kind of theme, but at the same time, it's not anymore. And it's a weird mix of this remnant of religion and not, but it's influenced in weird ways in society. And I feel this tension also of being religious, so to speak, and bringing it into different spheres. But at the same time, a lot of my friends know that I go to church regularly and I participate in the life of the church and my faith. And as you said, Leah, too, it's very interesting that these moments of when friends of mine who are atheists or whatever it may be, we bring up faith and have really amazing conversations, which I think is so crucial because we each learn from one another, right? If I lived in a bubble of people like me, there wouldn't be any growth, as we know generally in all contexts. But I think that is what's so beautiful about that tension, because it challenges us at the same time to be like, why do I actually believe in what do I believe, and why is it important to me? And for me, this plurality, I think, is really shown, and I've really learned it even more through my current work, where we work as an NGO at the United Nations with a lot of other faith-based organizations. And really faith, in a way, is put aside, but not in a bad way, in a sense of we are all advocating, for example, on the human right to water and sanitation or some other human right that is necessary. So together we say, as people of faith, we're going to work and advocate in this. And I think this plurality that we see in all of society in different ways, depending where you're located, of course, but here in the US, I think is really beautiful because, again, it's this tension, this challenge, but it allows for growth and then hopefully some kind of progress in the world as well.
I can go next, Leah. Karin, yeah, thank you for this question. And as for myself, as I also said before, there are actually two completely different realities that shaped my perspective on the questions. And from one hand, there is that there is my experience, life experience, to be civil society activist and work for freedom of religion or belief, tolerance and human rights in the context of Georgia. It is a country where Georgian Orthodox Church still enjoys huge privilege status compared to other religious and faith communities. And of course, like as being a member of majority church allows you to feel this privilege, but of course working again, as I said, for protecting minority rights and working for human rights and religious freedoms. And on the other hand, as I'm living now in a pluralistic society in Italy, almost over the 10 years now, I feel, and I'm in the shoes of a faith minority community. At the same time, I'm also working for the big European ecumenical network, and we are often advocating for the matters and causes that often are understood as only secular matters. And it's, sometimes it's a challenge, but it's also an excellent exercise how we can, transform in the context of religion, the matters that very often people understand as only the secular organizations or the secular institutions should be dealing and working on. And as regards to the challenges that you were asking, Karen, I think that the main challenge remains, of course, the overall rising level of intolerance, discrimination, and of course all the biases we are facing towards migrants, cultural, ethnic, and religious minority and marginalized groups, and it's everywhere, unfortunately, still as in Italy as in many parts of Europe. And as regards to the last part of your question, which I think is maybe one of the exciting moments and was to answer to it, like what we see as an opportunity in this pluralistic world. And I will briefly answer maybe on this point, like don't panic, organize. I think most of you've seen this photos, and I think this is something that we should doing as members of religious communities to find the networks and partnerships, and also for real female religious leaders. Our network is a result of these opportunities that we can actually relate to each other and find joint efforts to work towards making this world a better place.
I actually want to jump into the idea of pluralism, because to me, I consider, and I think we all do, that I feel like I live in a very pluralistic society, be it Europe itself or even more so in my case, France, because there's such a diverse population and communities and trends. So I have always, and until now, been living with people of different backgrounds, faith or no faith, cultures and traditions. And although I agree that it can be sometimes challenges because, as human beings, we feel like maybe we can connect more with what seems safe and similar to us. And that's the only way for us to enjoy it. So we when it's so plural and diverse, we don't necessarily feel comfortable, but it's actually an opportunity to as Spiritula and Natia mentioned, an opportunity to go beyond and learn and understand why it might not come naturally to us. But it's also a way to find different ways to connect, to see what brings us together, like today, because it's an opportunity to connect on an even deeper level. Where we might not feel like we have much in common, so we actually actively seek for it. I know that I have friends of different faiths and cultures, and we are friends because we share values or interests. So we do get further in that sense, and sometimes we connect with others because what we have in common is our difference. But just like I'm in a pluralistic society, I'm also in a secular country, and I think France isn't just any typical secular country. It's really shaped by a very unique literally in the word, understanding of secularism, and a very unique application of the concept. So, it started like most countries with, becoming a secular state was the separation of church and the state last century. And then later on, in about 15 years ago, there was a new law that changed that meaning of secularism. And, when we look at different countries in Europe or even the US or across the world, there is no same application of secularism. And I think that application actually of secularism impacted the expression of pluralism in our French society. In my case, secularism was all I knew. It's heavily present and taught as soon as we enter school. And if anything, I actually learned about different systems and approaches, and learned that there was different secular states and that it meant different things, where we can all live in a society cohesively. Much more later, when meeting people for whom what we had in France wasn't the norm. So a few personal experiences, for instance, was that when I entered the public school, the wearing of any religious symbols was banned. Meaning that I had to take off my hijab, the headscarf, every single day in front of the school premises, and that I was not allowed to wear it during school trips, whether we go to the European Parliament or to Spain. So I've been trying to find ways to go with hats and things. It can be seen as anecdotes right now, but it's actually very humiliating situations. Because we find people from very, depending on when you decide to wear it, young age or not, we find people that weaponize secularism and use it to hide their discriminations towards our intolerance towards religions, and in my case, Islamophobia. So all of this personally highly impacted my religiosity and faith, but also my mental health and well-being, and ultimately completely impacted my student experience. I remember I tried to convince for years my parents to let me go into another middle school and then high school, which was completely across the country in France, because for me it was such it was hurting me so much. It was like feeling my identity being completely broken and teared apart. But then, despite all my begging, they wouldn't let their teenager move on their own across the country. So all of this really impacts us, but it also impacts the rest of society, and not just, people of faith, because just like there was bad experiences with the teaching body, you have the same with the students. Not seeing religious symbols or not seeing people from different backgrounds or faith and traditions actually prevent us from having these very, very important discussions and explanation. And as you all mentioned before, the questioning that, is completely legitimate sometimes, and it's actually, how we can engage in conversation and dialogue. So there is no chance of actually confronting views or preconceptions, and all we have is a stripping part of people's identity and creating a standard that we call the norm, and that ultimately make the other stand out. And I think what Hajar said at the beginning very resonated with me, because when we think of what's your faith to me, well, it's not that I want to, but it's that it was made to be something that makes me stand out. And it's a way of objectifying something that I haven't asked for. So yeah, that's kind of like my experiences with, there's much more, but I think that's kind of like the different, take that we take of France's understanding of secularism and its application.
Thank you, Hiba. That's really hard to follow on from. It's actually really great that you're here, because usually I'm the one speaking about the European perspective, and this time around I really want to enjoy talking from the Irish perspective. And obviously throughout, Europe as a Muslim, we have those different lived experiences, and yours is the most extreme experience of that, of, your identity being stripped away, you having to feel humiliated on a daily basis as you go into school, and all of these different issues. I guess from the Irish perspective, to kind of dig a little deeper in that, I think for us it's very much a newer form of secularism. You know, we were staunch Catholic state. We were very much, it was apparent, you know, that, you know, the Catholic Church was, you know, I had nuns as teachers. I know there's still quite a few, and highly respect them. You know, and so a lot of it was about faith, but what we've evolved or we've moved on to is this more secular thinking that sometimes you feel like in Ireland, for example, you know, the political and the media establishment seem to kind of somehow want to eliminate the engagement of religion at the moment in the public sphere. I don't know whether we're headed towards another, you know, the rest of Europe and kind of following in their trend. I wonder. But truly speaking, from the other side, although there is this fear, I guess, or shyness, I think people shy away from speaking even about faith in Ireland. There's also an ingrained respect. And I think for people of faith, that's what is important. You know, these are the fundamentals of rights, is that if I come in, you know, wearing my headscarf, you know, I don't expect you to absolutely love it, but I expect you to respect that I'm wearing it. And this makes no difference to you. So from the Irish perspective, we do have still an openness. We still have a very much of a respectful engagement. However, it's still worrying, as I said. I think in terms of the biggest challenges, I'm not entirely sure if this is from a Muslim female perspective or from a Muslim youth perspective on a kind of a wider scale. So we don't have, you know, the French and the Belgian Muslim women situation and or the political rhetoric even, but it's more that we have first generation young people in Ireland. For us, it's more national, cultural, religious identities. And I think a lot of the time it's about us young people finding those identities. Again, I don't like to put people into boxes, but somehow we're trying to fit ourselves into these different boxes. And I think that is one of the challenges actually that I've found most recently, is that, you know, finding our Muslim identity as an Irish person is something that a lot of young people are struggling with. I don't necessarily, because, you know, obviously I'm representative quite physically and quite, you know, I'm quite, you know, vocal in that sense. I think that's one part of it. The other part is, for me, is the communication. I think in Ireland, we shy away, as I said, about speaking about faith sometimes. And I think, sadly, it can actually progress into some sort of racism and discrimination, because ignoring something, it doesn't make it any better, does it? You know, and I think there was one example, actually, I remember one of our own MEPs actually who commented about a few of our young Muslims' headscarves, and she wasn't doing it out of being, you know, racist or discriminating, but she was doing it out of being this friendly Irish person who was trying to communicate something and didn't manage to. So I think we have an issue with how we communicate respectfully as well. In terms of opportunities, there's plenty. I'm the optimist, you know, always looking for an opportunity. But I think from an Irish perspective, in the past couple of years, actually, the Dublin City Interfaith Forum has done an incredible job to bring faiths together. And I think, you know, a lot of people think interfaith dialogue is very fluffy, and it can be, let's all hold hands and sing Kumbaya, if you like. But genuinely, it can also bring about this kind of discussion. And this is what is necessary, because the minute we start communicating, discussing, the minute I start listening to what Hiba went through, or Natia goes through, or Leah goes through, and so on and so forth, that is where the dialogue happens. That is where the solutions happen. And I think just to emphasize, actually, again, that the Dublin City Interfaith Forum has done this really, really wisely in a society that is evolving into a secular state almost. Don't quote me on that, but I genuinely believe that. I think that, you know, the opportunities are here, and the opportunities we need to start grabbing, because if we don't keep talking about it, we're going to have a situation on our hands for example, like what's happening in France at the moment. And I think that's detrimental to the identity of young Muslims and in Ireland and elsewhere, to be honest. Yeah.
Thank you, Hajar, Hiba, Natia, Leah, and Spridula. Those were such rich responses. Before we get to our last question, I just want to respond with a short, I think this raises a really important issue about religious minorities. And with my own work with the European Baptists, we work on religious freedom, freedom of religion or belief for all across the Europe, Middle East, and Central Asian region. So from Ireland to Russia and from north to south. And sometimes what you see in these contexts over and over is that there are a huge, within each nation in this room, in this area, there is a different kind of majority, a different kind of like, this is the way that it is here, whether it be France or whether it be Russia or Germany or Italy. There's a different majority in every country, and they all differ from each other. But I think when you belong, what I've noticed we're in kind of a room full of border crossers here in many ways. But as you cross these borders, you see that when you sit in the position of a religious or any other kind of majority, it is so hard for people to conceptualize what it means to be a religious minority or another minority. Sometimes they can't. I'm sure I've spoken to French people and they cannot see how some of these rules about headscarves hurt people. You can, how do I say this? You can bang your head against a wall trying to explain it, and people do not see. To begin to even have these very important policy discussions, let alone cultural discussions, I think I'm just more and more convinced that we need to have a better ground of religious literacy, because what you don't know, and when you don't know, you can't see, you can't listen. So this is, I think, a huge motivator and just a reflection I have from our responses. We're going to go to question number 3, and then hopefully soon, in about 5 to 7 minutes, open it up to the questions from the group, because we have great questions. And that is, how do I function in this world, in this mix of identities and contexts, both as a woman and a person of faith? How do I function? What are we've kind of addressed a bit of this. What are the positives? What are the hope? How do we engage in the world we live in? Just briefly.
Thanks, Kieran. I'll start with this one. I think it was mentioned before, but really for me, it's finding this peace again, this tension. And I think like spaces like this, where we, especially as women, can come together and speak about this is so crucial to me and to my formation and ability to function, to be honest. I will say that I was part of this cohort that was similar, this women in faith, and there's some of them on the call, so I just want to make a shout out to everyone. But being in the room with these incredible women, just like we are today on the webinar, like being able to really relate and connect with one another, as Hiba said earlier, as women, as human beings, is I think the most crucial, again, part. And that allows me to function, because at the same time, we need to plug in to being this human experience and how difficult it is, and really encourage one another. And I think at the same time, again, just like for me, going to my faith tradition and really understanding and like plugging into what I'm used to, right? Like for me, it's going and sitting in the church when I'm stressed or whatever it may be, and reminding myself that, hey, I'm only human and I can only do so much, and God has a plan ultimately that I'm a part of in some capacity with the people around me. And I think also, lastly, briefly, is seeing the faith of the people around me, whether they are Christian or Muslim or Jewish or whatever it may be or not, really strengthens my own faith, because we can relate on this point, but we also then can ask one another, like, why do you believe this? And also, why is it important to you? And like really being in a room of people together and saying like, hey, we all think there's something greater out there, and we all don't necessarily agree what that may be, but there's also beauty in that we really deeply care about this world and who we are, and also the faith tradition we come from, and want to share with others. So for me, that's the way to find the balance within all of this. And I think there's so much beauty in all of that.
I think that was a very, very inspiring, response. Thank you, Spridula. And I think that, yes, at the same time, it's I think we can all agree that our faith really is kind of like our fuel to continue and, try to make the world better, and not just, to try and through our different organizations here, to try and recognize the minority rights of the religion we come from, which is still important. But really, like through our faith, we understand that it's about making a positive change in the world for the world. But at the same time, I do have to say that I do feel, and I think that Leah's point before about, when you're religious, it's as if you were somehow dumb. And just like Kieran said, in France, it's even more so present. And it's actually funny when you get out of France, is mostly where you see that the rest of the world doesn't necessarily see things like that. Because I feel like we're actually living in an era where having a different identity is antagonized. And it's an interesting paradox, because whilst we're living probably in one of the most pluralistic societies we've known, there is that rejection of the individuality and the affirmation for the need of the need for conformism. And that's how I feel as a woman of faith, at least in France. A bit less so in Europe, but I do think it's present. I think we kind of associated, the religions to the lack of progress somehow. And I've personally been reflecting a lot recently about my past choices. I've started a master's in comparative law, and I've been thinking of, why I went for certain things rather than others. And I realized that, the current society we're living in, especially France and the laïcité, not only affected me as a child, but continues now, because it somehow defined my future. As in, with the law that bans religious symbols from public servant positions, it kind of defines who can have a job and how. Because you can't necessarily become a judge, nurse, or teacher, doctor, mayor with your headscarf. So I realized that it made me adjust my own expectations and my own life plans. So it became self-censorship. And I think that's very dangerous, especially for women, where we're in a time where we're trying to empower them to find their own voice and choice. And then we're adding that other layer where they're actually self-censoring and restraining themselves. And this actually disproportionately affects not just Muslims or people of faith, because as I mentioned, it's also the Sikh and the Jews and the Christians and any religions with a religious symbol, but more so women. And therefore it will also affect their independence and integration in the French society, because you are not let in. Sometimes it's as stupid as just having someone in a protest with a religious symbol or appearing on TV, and then the entire country just like flips, and it's like the worst thing has happened. So as a result, I've seen a lot of people doing that censorship, and for me, functioning perfectly would be to be accepted fully and unapologetically as we are. But in today's society, I think that just existing or trying to, and just functioning or trying to, is somehow a stance, and even so a fight for human rights. And especially when basic things like that are criminalized or prohibited. I think that lately, I want to speak generally, but like the really recent context of France. If some of you have been following, I won't bore you with the details, but the very dangerous laws, not just against religious minorities, but also NGOs and journalists, has shown that the concept of secularism has been completely denatured and weaponized, and it's almost so become a state religion itself. It's almost so could become a faith in itself, and it's either you embrace it or you don't. So I think that added to all of that, and the different anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and all the discrimination against all religions, or kind of like being fooled by all of those action taken by the states and bodies and actors. So for me, part of my functioning to stay not go crazy is reminding myself that through my faith, and this would be a complete 180, but we gotta stay sane and not be. A lot of people actually consider going to Canada or leaving France, which is interesting. I really think that historically we will see an exodus of a lot of religious minority from France. I have seen personally people that are concerned for themselves or their kids. Sometimes, at the beginning it was Muslim women because they wanted to work and they were limited, so they just, took opportunities elsewhere, which is a loss for France because we're losing the potential that we have. But now I think we're going to see that bigger. But I think part of my functioning is that through my faith, I remind myself that believing is also staying positive, and it's also staying hopeful, in God and in the mercy, and so it's to constantly try and contribute to bring on a positive change on all fields, as I mentioned, from environment to education to youth rights. And this starts with myself, educating ourselves and, constantly trying to get into these conversations, but also my close ones, community, and then Europe and the world as a whole. And I think this goes through different platforms and, organization as well, such like My Kiss Femiso and the different organization of you guys. So I really think that there is a lot of things that are concerning, but at the same time, it is our faith that kind of keep us grounded and push us forward.
Cool. Thank you, Hiba. I'm going to jump in again. I'm sorry if I cut some of you off, but this question of functioning is a good one, but I'm noting that we're running low on time and we have a lot of even better questions coming from the audience. So I'm going to pose some of the audience questions starting now. I am afraid that we're not going to be able to pose every question that you guys put in the chat, but I'll pick out a few. And I just want to say to everyone in the audience that, so yeah, I'm making an abrupt transition to Q&A time. But I want to say to everyone in the audience that FoRēL this is our first try, this is our first event, and we really want to be open and flexible with the platform so that it's discussion oriented. So we have a Q&A format now, but if you would like to engage with this platform, please send us emails, answer the feedback thing at the end of this webinar, so that we can think of other ways to engage. It doesn't always need to be this Q&A format, but that's what it's going to be today. So with that, I'm going to go with a question from, my screen just got small, from Sophia Cesario, and it's, what do you think the role of female religious leaders should be in terms of the fight for gender equality in society?
Yeah, maybe if I jump on that one, because that's actually what I wanted to take up from Hiba's contribution, is that this parallel sometimes between being or the dual condition of being both a young woman and a religious person, I think it can be such a fruitful situation, because, for example, when I started growing up, I had this naive perspective, well, that I am Leah, I can do anything I want, right? And which is like a positive basis, and I'm still glad for having that positive basis. But then I realized, getting into works, getting into international organizations, that I was always the young woman. I was the woman, like I was the person to meet certain requisites, right? So it was always about me as the girls on the panel as well. And while I appreciate that, and I know that these quota are necessary to get me on the panel, I started to see myself as a woman, especially with a special condition and with a special disadvantage, right? And thanks to also, among others, this conversation this evening, I realized that a similar thing is happening to my religious identity, that it is also in a certain way restrained, and I'm not aware of this because I assume that everything will be fine, right? I am a Christian in a historically Christian context. I am kind of white. I have a good education. I can get everything I want. And then I realized, no, I don't. And actually, I think this double condition of being religious and being a woman, and being aware of that and getting aware of the discrepancies that we face between our flourishing and our mere functioning, because these are two different ways, right? Either I function, which is fine and good and maybe a precondition, but it's not full flourishing. And if we combine these knowledges and these awarenesses, then actually I think we can engage better into conversation, actually point to the fact that there is a discrimination against women, and there is discrimination against religious people. And I think this is, and then again, going back to what you guys said before, is this motivation that I take from my belief, that I take from that motivates me to go beyond what I see, to strive for a better world, right? And I think this combination actually helps a lot. So thank you so much for what you said so far, girls.
Karen, can I just add quickly to the point what?
Please, yes.
Yeah, just to also maybe answer the question and to add what Leah was saying, that, you know, kind of, you know, like we all felt like to be probably in this position of being disabled sometimes because of maybe we're belonging to one gender of today's, like, you know, the world, and especially in the work and in the positions we fill it. So that's why I think it's also very, very important that when we are talking about the process of learning and understanding and considering difference, both men and women should be part of the education of talking about the women empowerment, and not only working with women and young girls, but also with young boys as well. And saying that empowering women and gender equality is not only about women. It's like working together in this world, and for all the motives and causes we all have. And I think that will be the one way to achieve the gender equality in all spheres of life, religion, secular, or any other parts of, like, same about economy and social issues as well. So both, I think, girls and boys should be part of conversations and discussions. And yeah.
Can I jump in there, Kieran?
Sure.
The smirk on my face should have probably said it all at this point, but I'm going to take the other opposing kind of perspective here, because I actually found it really empowering. I loved being the woman with the headscarf, able to represent and always being chosen in that sense. Obviously, it was a great burden and a lot of work and lots of traveling and a lot of exhaustion in a 12-year time frame. But let's put it this way, our brothers and our men get enough airtime, quite frankly. And I think that when we are chosen, sorry to say that, or to use that, it's extremely empowering and very much the time for us to stand up. And for me, it never put me in a box, quite frankly. It took me out of the box. It allowed me to speak up for what I thought was right at the time, and to advocate using my female voice and as a woman, but also to advocate for something that was bigger than myself, and to be representative, I think. So I agree with Nadia. We need to educate our young men and women and our youth, and everybody needs to talk about, gender equality. But sometimes we actually need to come out of our little shells and start speaking up. And I think this is the time for it. And I'm not saying we're going to bulldoze or we're going to take somebody else's voice. But what I'm saying is that when we are asked to do it, we need to start standing up and doing it, because somebody else is going to come along, male or female, and who's going to do a worse job than the rest of us, and this is I think we need to really keep that in mind. And I'm sorry for my brutal honesty, but you knew it was going to come out at some point. So, but yeah, I mean, that's the way I genuinely see it. Like, we can't keep saying, well, I was put on a pedestal, so bloody what? That has to happen. I'm sorry for the rudeness, but this needs to happen now. We cannot keep sitting to a side because we don't think we have some kind of imposter syndrome, or we're not able to speak up, because quite frankly, we're able to speak up for everybody, women or men, and that's the way we look at it. We use that platform not to engage only women, we use that platform to engage all, but hopefully with a female voice.
Brilliant. I want to cut in to ask the next question too. That was brilliant, Hajar, and I think this next question really lines up to what you're saying, because we're in kind of a double position here. We've been talking a lot about what it is to be a religious person in a pluralistic and secular world, which is a bit of a minority position. But what's gone up until this point a bit unspoken is kind of the historical trouble that the religious traditions represented on this panel has had with female leadership, which we hope will continue to thematize later. I have a question from Hello Victoria. Good to hear from you, and I can't say your last name. Victoria Alexandrovitsena asked us a good question, and it ties to what Hajar said. How do you reconcile your calling as a female religious leader with the conviction some hold that leadership is not something women should pursue? And how is this dynamic affected by the gender expectations of your surrounding society? I think this will be our last question today, but we'll continue the conversation later. Yeah, how do you reconcile your calling as a female religious leader with the conviction that some hold that leadership is not something women should pursue? How does this affect?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go on, Hiba, go on.
I was going to get the ball rolling with the fact that some might hold that conviction is the reason that we should continue and go through that calling as religious leaders or as leaders, and I think that's something that we I'm no way expert in all the religions, but all the religions have, in their teachings, the fact that we should all be change makers for ourselves. And at least like what my faith as well has told me is that you need to be that drive, that you need to be driven to bring that change. And that comes with a leader. So for me, it starts to if you want to bring the change, obviously there's going to be a counteraction and, people that we want to drag you back down, but it is by going through that you might actually bring in that change. So I'll let the floor to the other panelists in case they want to contribute as well.
Other thoughts?
Sorry, I'm just going to follow on from that. I think it's about changing the narrative. This is the thing. We keep asking the same questions in the same way. I think we need to start looking at the narrative differently. Nobody's saying to, move away from our religious traditions. Leadership is about, being a peacemaker. Leadership is about being compassionate and empathetic and, bringing in these incredibly fundamental values that we all live by. So why are we still talking about, female-male leadership? Why are we not talking about the value systems that drives the leadership? It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, if you're leading. Okay, in some traditions, like in Islam, we don't expect women to stand up and lead prayer. That's a different type of leadership. We're talking about being role models. We're talking about being community leaders. We're talking about being change makers and peacemakers. And I think the issue is we start to kind of mix things up without looking at what the leadership actually means from that broad, bird's eye view, rather than, the level that's, on the ground where we're starting to pull to pieces our own religious and faith traditions. And that's not what we're about. Yeah. Sorry, that was it.
All right, are there any other thoughts on that? I think we might have time for one more question or some passionate last word from someone, if someone's burning to say something.
I didn't want to, I really appreciate what you said, Hiba and Hajar, and that there are so many different forms of leadership and that we shouldn't just put all on the same level, right? But then again, I experience so many times, and not necessarily from my religious tradition itself, but from the local congregation or from wherever, that I do want to seek different forms of leadership. And even if in my church female pastors are allowed, right? And this is a recent development, so it's not a big thing. Well, it's a big thing, but not a traditional thing. Still, I feel and meet a lot of discrimination in different forms. And this can be either old men telling me, you know what, you're a girl, you shouldn't say that. Or also other young women saying, well, this is not what you're supposed to be, right? You're a woman, you shouldn't become a pastor. And I think this is really difficult in a way, because even though I'm utterly convinced that the God in which I believe loves me exactly as much as any other of his creatures, and even though I'm convinced that in God's perspective, I'm totally fit for any kind of leadership, and it's not about my gender, still I face discriminations in this real world, in this very down-to-earth realm, right? And I think in a way we need to talk about it. I mean, we shouldn't be so pessimistic and always saying, oh, we are the poor women and everything is so bad. But I do see challenges there. And maybe they're not from the bigger picture of our faith traditions, but still, because they are in a way embedded in patriarchal contexts, we do, at least I do, find some challenges there.
Gary, just before you move to the next question, I really, Leah, I really admire and appreciate your comments, and I would just really briefly say, if we can dream it, we can do it. So whatever dreams are, like when we dream when we are little girls, or even now, I still have dreams. Even I'm not anymore like little girl. I think we can do it, and it's all about empowering them. And it's all about, supporting and encouraging each other, because what we are doing this evening is also like, still giving a trust and others that the word we want to see, the word Leah wants to see, the word I want to see, Hiba, Hajar, Spiridula, we all want to see, is possible, discussing and making it happen. So, sorry, Karen, just wanted to add this last.
Beautiful. I think I want to add something. We have a couple of, I just want to say to that too, I've experienced kind of any advancement that women have made, both within our religious traditions or politically in the past couple of 100 years. I mean, we have other women to thank for that. And I think that's one of these crucial things, is supporting women, because I think there's this danger, and this can happen in the business world, this can happen in politics or religion, of being like the only woman in the room. Sometimes you're put in as the only woman in the room to fill a quota, and there is a value in that. But I think of politically my mothers and grandmothers, or I think of the women in my faith tradition who made it possible to be a female leader, to be a female pastor as a Baptist. And I think they fought for that. And they didn't fight for that just for themselves, but they fought for that for me. And so I think Hajar's call that, in my tradition, women are children of God, creatures of God, all genders, and we are given capacities for peacemaking and for leadership. And we should fight not just that we can use them, but so that other women can use them, because there's so much to give and no one should be suppressed in that way. And I think that's really my conviction. And one reason why I'm so excited about this platform, FoRēL, as a place to learn from each other and to encourage each other and to talk about these big issues. So I think we really don't have any more time for Q&A. We got to close this down soon. We have some announcements and thank yous, and I think I'm going to go over to Hajar for that. Yeah.
Thank you firstly to the panelists and to my sisters on this FoRēL journey that we've been on for a couple of months now. And I think it's really opened up all of our eyes. And I see even some of the incredible questions coming in. And it's such a shame that we haven't been able to kind of discuss these. But these are the questions that we hope to bring to our next webinar. And so keep them coming in. So just to say, firstly, our announcement of the next webinar is on the 25th of February, 2021, and hopefully we'll all be out and about and not stuck in our attics and at home or with libraries behind us. So put that in your diaries, save the date. We haven't decided our topic yet, but we are so excited to hear from you. So please feel free to email us, and hopefully our email will show up on the questionnaire after this, the survey, sorry. FoRēL, exactly.
gmail.com. I'll write it in the chat. Sorry to interrupt you.
Perfect. No, that's brilliant. Please do write it in the chat, Kieran. We are talking about female leadership, and we have looked at the challenges associated with being women in this secular and pluralistic societies. And this is leading up to hopefully our next webinar, as we said, and hopefully we can look at the leadership discussion and what it means, because each faith tradition looks at it very differently and we define it even within ourselves very differently. So hopefully that will be the discussion for next time. I want to say a very special thanks to a few people, Vanessa Barito and Emily Niehoff, again, and all of our guests, and the Council of European Churches who brought us together. Actually, a few of us have kind of, been together over a few years now, but earlier this year is when we actually we had met, all six of us, or five of us, I should say. So thank you so much to the Conference of European Churches. Thank you so much to each of the panelists for taking out the time to constantly discuss these topics. And also, hopefully, and thank you to all our guests as well. So we totally wish you a wonderful evening. Thank you to everybody for joining us, and thank you for the questions and being so engaged with us as well the entire time. So I think that's a good evening from me. Kieran?
Yeah, I think we can call it a night. This will be recorded. This has been recorded as well. So you can check your social media. Our pages will kind of get this out and distribute it for if you want to send it along to anybody who couldn't make it here today. So thank you all very much for real, and enjoy your evening.
Thank you for the for real conversation.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to learn from all of you.
Thanks a million. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, everyone. See you in February.